One morning, as Steve was dressing himself, he thought about something that you have probably thought about, too. He thought about how easy it was to tie his shoelaces. This used to be hard for Steve to do. Once his mother had to do this for him, but now he could do it by himself. Steve liked to do things by himself. He liked getting out the food in the morning for Chipper, his dog. Taking care of Chipper was Steve's job every day. Later, Steve had on his coat and was ready to go to school, but his mother hadn't packed his lunch. Instead, she gave him money to buy his lunch at the school cafeteria. Steve liked to pay for things himself. On the way to school, Steve had to cross several streets. He had been taught how to cross safely. He looked carefully both ways, and when he was sure no cars were coming, he crossed. At the busy corner on Main Street, closer to school, he waited again, until the policeman signaled that it was all right. Often we need help from others to get things done. Steve saw that his teacher, Miss Wilson, was helping Peggy. But Steve liked to do things himself whenever he could. Sometimes it wasn't easy. And he thought of asking for help. But when he really tried, Steve found that he could do it. All of us know what a good feeling we get when we do something by ourselves. All of us can do more things for ourselves than we may think. Like Steve, we can put our boots away as soon as they're off, and we hang up our clothes so we can find them later. When we get done, instead of waiting for the teacher to tell us, we can go to our seats by ourselves. Keeping a neat desk so we can find our things easily is something else that we can do. Sometimes we can help ourselves when we have trouble with our work, as Steve did when he came across a word that he didn't know. At first, he was going to ask Miss Wilson. But she was busy with some of the other children, so Steve tried to figure out the word himself. He looked at the word and then at the picture for hints. He tried to think of a word that would make sense with the other words, and then he knew. The word was plant. He had figured it out by himself. Of course, we can't do everything by ourselves. Sometimes we learn to do them by watching others. When Steve found a torn page in his book, he didn't try to fix it. He didn't know how. So he took the book to his teacher. Miss Wilson enjoyed helping her pupils take care of things. She had some tape that she used to fix the page. Steve watched carefully, so he might do it himself someday. By watching others, we can learn to do many new things for ourselves. Later, when Steve was working a problem in his arithmetic book, the point of his pencil broke. He went to sharpen it, but the sharpener was hard to turn. It was full of pencil shavings and needed to be emptied. Could he do it by himself? Miss Wilson nodded. Steve had watched once before when Miss Wilson had emptied the sharpener, so this time he thought he could do it himself. Uh-oh, some of the shavings spilled on the floor. Well, we can't always do things perfectly the first time. Sometimes mistakes help us to learn. Steve went on to finish the job. After dumping all the shavings, he put the case back on the sharpener. Then he cleaned up the floor. Cleaning up is another thing we can all learn to do by ourselves. Some jobs may seem difficult at first, yet they become easy after we do them a few times. Later, at lunchtime, Steve had no trouble getting his food. It was easy to find the different foods and to choose certain ones. Not too long ago, his teacher or parents had to do this for him. Steve felt proud because he could count the money to pay for his own lunch. And he knew how to take care of the rest of the money his mother had given him. After lunch, Miss Wilson had put out some things on a table. Poster paints and brushes. They were going to paint. The children had learned to arrange their papers on the tables, so each of them would have a place to work. And they had learned to put on their smocks so they wouldn't get paint on their clothes. Of course, there were a few who were not quite able to do some things for themselves, but they were trying, with a little help from their friends. Of course, no one can do everything well, so we help others with the things we can do best. When Steve had trouble opening one of the paint jars, Ken offered to help. But he couldn't open it either. Joan thought that she could open it. The boys needed the paint, so they let her try. Running warm water over the top was something Joan had learned from her mother. Now they could get the top off, and they could use the paint. So Joan had shown them something they could do next time for themselves. Of course, we don't always have to watch others to learn to do things. When Steve and the other boys and girls were ready to paint, each one started by himself, without looking to see what his friends were doing. It's usually more fun if you paint things that you think of yourself. Later, when the pictures had been laid out to dry, Steve and the other children cleaned up. They washed off their brushes, put the paint and other supplies away, and washed off the tables, so that everything was left just as they had found it. Taking care of things we know helps keep them in good condition for when we wish to use them again. Remember how carefully Steve hung up his wraps in the morning? Now they were easy to find. Steve was able to dress himself quickly. The children hurried to get home with their paintings. Steve was proud of his. He had enjoyed painting it, and he'd enjoyed the many other things he had learned to do. Like Steve, all of us can have more fun as we learn to do new things for ourselves.